Man, looking forward to today's show. Today, we're going to talk about Newsom's plan in California to support Black students, and we are going to discuss a school in Indiana that has gone quite viral. Come back with us. Go. Man, welcome back to another episode of the South Star Classroom. That's David. That's Omar. I am Charles, and our fourth guest will be joining us very shortly. But before we get into these big topics of Newsom and his plan for Black folks and this school that's going viral, first I need to check in with you fellas. How are you gentlemen doing today? Let's start with you, David.
Yeah, man.
I'm doing well. I've got some new hardware in place, so hopefully my image is a little more crisp. Last week I was looking very pixelated and quite pale, so hopefully we've solved those two issues. Let's see. Beyond that, today is Friday, and our kids' school is having a Valentine's Day dance today from 5 to 7, which he is attending. He's very excited about it. And they do this dance every year. They actually do like 3 dances a year. It's great. And he's gone to all of them. They canceled this one. They canceled it a month and a half ago. They sent out an email, not really saying why, but sometimes when you work in schools, you get overwhelmed and you're like, we got to cancel something. Well, they tried to cancel the dance, and within 2 weeks, the dance was back on because I think the parents pushed back. We sent some emails and we're just like, what, how can we help? Let's pull this off for the kids. And so, 2 weeks after that, we got an email saying the Valentine's dance is back on, right? And so that's happening right now. So that's what's going on over here. We'll hopefully get a good report later this evening.
It sounds like love won. Omar, how you doing, brother? You was telling us some stuff off screen. So let me give you the whole screen, brother. It's good to see you.
I don't need the whole screen, man, but I will say this, David, it's good to hear that you got the collabo. Ain't nothing better than the parent teacher administrator collabo. It's like That's you right. Are Drake doing a collabo with I don't know, man, DMX. It's like worlds unite that often would not unite. I don't know if DMX would ever do a collabo with Drake. No, man, I had a very rough week, man. Sometimes in the school business, we deal with things behind the scenes that are, incredibly difficult, that are ultimately time consuming. And I don't want to get into the particulars on this here show for all kinds of reasons, but let's just say that when some parties start acting against the best interest of not only the school, but of the children, I get upset. And, I got to tell you straight up, like there's a certain point where Monsieur Yanar, who is very kind and sweet and understanding when it comes to things, starts understanding that there's a pattern of behavior. And then I got to tell you, just like the Empire, Monsieur Yanar strikes back. And when he strikes back, he strikes back with evidence, and it's hard. So that has been my week, ladies and gentlemen, of dealing with all these things. But for the most part, man, it's exciting. We may be in talks with our own Mr. Castillo to come out, check out our schools here in El Paso, perhaps do a little bit of collabo, getting the South Star Classroom into the classroom. And look, man, I'm modeling. So if we're going to talk about our consultant services, why don't we start with our own school, with our own self, and say, listen, like, I'm all for the positive support that this organization can provide schools. And I'd be a hypocrite if I didn't say, let's just not start.
See, he was talking that good stuff, and then he like,
he was like, man.
He was like, before I make this verbal agreement, let me get up out of here. The school caught him and was like, no, sir. Well, I'm doing well. I have a
Yeah,
massive home improvement project that is happening, and it is stressful, but I'm learning a lot. And I'm just saying, if you can dig up floors, if you can pipe things, if you know how to put epoxy down, like you can have a very lucrative existence. Because I am paying thousands of dollars, but hopefully it'll add a lot of value to my home. My basement, my studio, my main studio flooded. So I'm rebuilding it from the ground up. So, but I'm happy to be here and I'm happy to discuss these topics. So later on, we're going to be discussing Gavin Newsom's plan in California to serve Black students. But first, there's been a lot of virality around this school in Indiana. And I think we should take a watch. I don't know if everybody here has seen it. So we're going to watch it together. And I'm really curious as to what you all's reaction are. And your reactions are going to be, our faces will be at the bottom. So be aware that the audience will be watching with us. Let me get that up for you. Because I don't know, when I sent this, did you all get a chance to had you seen this before, Omar, or had you just heard about this school before I click into it?
No, man, I have not heard about this at all.
Oh, okay, good. So we get to watch it for the first, I get to see your reaction for the first time live.
Yeah,
okay.
There you go.
I'm gonna have you all, your mic will not be muted. Go forth.
Welcome to Carmel High School. Join us on a tour. This is the auditorium.
This is the Commons.
This is the catwalk. This is the planetarium.
This is Senior Hallway. This is our Carmel High School Library.
This is the Oz hallway. This is the Carmel Cafe and Market. This is the back of the Carmel Cafe.
And this is our Carmel Cafe where we have Teddy.
This is the Carmel Varsity Gym.
This is the new addition to the Hall of Fame. This is the freshman gym. This is the weight room.
This is the wrestling room, baby.
This is the blue and gold gym. This is the blue and gold track.
This is the field house.
Look at Omar's face.
This is the varsity tunnel.
This is part of our wall of success.
This is our natatorium. This is the hallway of fame. This is our 3-story freshman center.
Whoa.
This is CHTV.
Oh man, they got a better setup than
This
Channel
is our
1.
live radio.
Yeah. That's cool. I like that.
This is the yearbook room.
They have a yearbook.
This is the auto shop.
This is the wood shop.
Man cafeteria.
This is the bookstore.
This is one of the many cooking rooms at Carmel.
And this is the Decker room.
All right. So welcome, Jubilee. We've missed you. Before we go into that the next topic, what are your general reactions? And I want to start with Omar, because Omar, even though he's having technical issues, we gotta get that fixed, brother. Even though he's having technical issues, his face was very animated. So what are your thoughts on this high school in Carmel?
Well, if I'm honest, it's like,
Oh, we're
yay
going
for
with Omar,
them.
but go ahead, sister. We got you. Go ahead.
Oh,
We got
you
you.
talking?
Welcome.
Were you talking to Omar or me?
We're talking to Omar. Omar was
Man,
having
ladies
like,
first, man.
basic
You go
gymnastics.
for it, man.
But go ahead, Jubilee. We got
Ladies
you.
First, ladies first. I mean, boo. I mean,
You booed the school?
I booed the school because of what it represents. I mean, that's my honest response. Like, yay for the children, yay for the students. I mean, I think every kid in America deserves to go to a school that has that sort of top-notch facility, you know. But it represents the inequities that we talk about on the show all the time. And it makes me sad. So I'm happy for them, but sad for what it represents. That's my initial raw, uncut response.
It's all good. I was gonna go to Omar, but he is having he must be talking to us on a Chromebook.
Don't you do Omar like that.
David, what are your general reactions to the school?
Oh man. I guess well, first of all, my first reactions were I think I know what's going on here. So we looked it up, and indeed it's a big school, so there's like 5,000 kids, so you get the benefit of the economies of scale. And then we look up at the demographics, and they definitely, the cute video, TikTok in a way, but they probably included every Latino and Black student at that school because those numbers are like somewhere in the 4% range. So it's mainly a white school. I don't know about the area, but yeah, it's definitely got all the bells and whistles. I'd like to maybe take a trip to Gary, Indiana, and see what the urban schools look like there.
Well, I live 20 minutes away from Gary, Indiana, so send me over there and we can
okay.
And we can take a video camera and I can show you.
Yeah.
So I have a few different thoughts. I think so. We chose this because it's been going viral and people have had some very strong feelings about it, right? And I think that and so I have a bunch of different thoughts. I have actually a nuanced thought. I actually understand the feelings of inequity because equity has been like a thing, right? Like that's kind of where we are. But and then I did some research. David and I were looking it up. That school has 5,000 people in it.
Mm-hmm.
It has 5,000. And also I looked up, I don't remember the numbers, but the cost per pupil is lower than many traditional urban schools. So I think there's a few different things that we got to talk about, right? Like my reaction to it is there are a lot of white kids at that school. It's like 70-something% white, 4% Latino, 4% Black. But I lived in Paducah, Kentucky. This is when I lived in the projects across the street from the city's high school. The city of Paducah had one high school, maybe two, and they don't have a charter traditional like beef. Their thing is there are city schools and there's county schools. So the city and the county compete with each other, and then they have contracts with each other. That school, Paducah Tillman, has just under 1,000 students and has almost everything that we just saw there. And it's a poor community for the most part. It has a mix of people, but what it makes me think about is there are equity issues across our country. And two, I don't think a lot of people understand how you get facilities like that. Now, look, if you go to a school and if you're in the Bible Belt, and Indiana isn't quite the Bible Belt, but if you go to a place that has these rich football or basketball tradition, they have boosters. They have people like that like, those are the entertainment. I grew up in a place, I lived in Chicago, I lived in Oakland, but when I lived with my grandmother in Paducah, it's one of those places on Friday night that the football team is shutting stuff down. Like go watch Varsity Blues, go watch any of those things. You can't have a school like that if you want a small school. If you want a school that got 200 kids in it or 250 kids in it, you can't have, not only can you not have those facilities, you can't have the diversity of different type of classes. You can't have these extravagant AP programs. You can't have cooking programs. Like not to that degree. You usually have to pick and choose the things that you have. And if you're a smaller school, you're going to make a different set of choices. So, well, thank you, Jeff, for correcting me. When I say it isn't a Bible Belt. Usually when I was talking about Bible Belt, though, I'm thinking about South Texas, that kind of like things kind of shut down or whatever. But the point that I was making is in that strip of land, there are schools that look like that. Now, I done been to schools in Indianapolis. A lot of those schools do not look like that. There's a Purdue Polytechnic that actually looks pretty good, though. It ain't that, but it looks pretty good. But here's the thing. When I went and visited Indianapolis, there's a lot of schools that are vestibules of like schools from yesteryear, right? So there might be this huge school that used to hold 2,000 or 3,000 people, but now it's a bunch of smaller schools inside of it with a lot of empty space. And those things now become defunct. So I get where Jubilee is coming from. I actually don't have any issue with you poo-pooing the school. I'm happy for those kids. I'm not going to be mad. Kids are kids, right?
Me
but
too.
like, I think that is a throwback to what schools used to look like. If you go back and look at Cooley High, like I grew up watching Cooley High as a kid. It was a poor school, but it was still huge and humongous. But I mean, we have to have this conversation. I think that Twitter and TikTok have been having a more surface reactionary conversation, which is valid. Yeah. And there are equity issues that we need to discuss. But also, we got people on here that run schools and that understand school funding and stuff like that. If you got 5,000 kids with X amount of dollars per student and you got a booster program, you know what I'm saying? Like, things can look a little different. That was my nuanced take on what I saw. But
Omar is back.
Jump in. I mean, let's have it's not a panel. Let's have a conversation about it.
I switched up the Firefox to the Chrome. Hopefully this works. I think Firefox kept being down. Listen,
well, I feel like, Omar, you in one of those schools that don't look like that Indiana school. You know what I'm saying? So the Wi-Fi might be a little different.
Man, listen, I look like I'm locked in a warehouse being held for ransom right now. That's where I'm at. We're at our central office right now, and we'd be lucky if the roaches decided to stay here. Look, my first take on a place like that is like, couldn't we have that up for like all kids? What a utopic situation. What a beautiful place. Like really good for those kids, because like ultimately the amenities and experiences that a kid could have are just extraordinary. And it's the kind of thing that like, I'm trying to run a 7 to 7 program at EPLA, like kids here from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Yep. Like imagine a place where it's like, you want to go swimming for like an hour? Like that's amazing. Right. Like I would love to have an institution that looks like that. And I can tell you, like, after spending $14 million on a school building, like ours looks nothing like that. You know, money doesn't go as far as it did back in the times of Cooley High. But I think ultimately what it is like, that's the kind of thing that I get excited about, to be like, see, like we could have all these amenities. Now, if you just took those 5,000 kids and broke them up into different academies, getting, specialized attention, the principal of that, like 500 person sect of that school knows every single child in the organization of it. That's really where I think economies of scale meet some of these practices from, arguably like the charter world or, the semi-a-traditional world, and unite, because what I would love is the combination of these two things. And what I think is surface is like, you can comment all you want on like rich white kids. You can comment all you want on what part of the country this is, but I don't think that there's anyone that watches this video that's saying, I don't want that for my kid.
For sure.
I think everyone's saying, I want those kinds of things for our kids, in addition to the kinds of academic supports that are extraordinarily meaningful and produce high yield results. And it's like, like my dream is like kids are working in groups, and it's like, cool, like you finished all your work, you finished all your homework. Why don't you go into the recording studio and learn about this and knock it out? Because like, why you got to be in class if you've already completed your proficiency standards? And really, like for me, last kind of idea is that like my goal with EPLA, my goal with a lot of these schools is like, how do we make our school day look a lot more like Milton Academy and Choate and Andover and Exeter, where these kids are going to college before they're going to college? And then you're like, well, Omar, like if they're not in class, what are they doing? Like, I don't know, going to the natatorium, being supervised, and like learning how to swim, learning how to lifeguard because they completed their proficiency results. You're putting a kid in prison in a classroom where they already know those standards, and that kid could be learning all these skill sets, or learning video production, or learning music production, or learning broadcasting, or learning journalism, or learning the basic tenets of swimming, which so many people in our communities don't know how to do because not a lot of pools in the urban areas where we grew up. Like, I mean, my mom had difficulty learning how to swim, and she figured that out when she was 35.
School buildings are critically important. However, they don't educate children, right? Buildings are, can be by design, a mechanism or a means to help facilitate learning, but buildings do not educate children. Let's just say that. I think the school looks amazing. If I lived there, I'd want my kid to go there. However, we know you can quickly do the math. We all know about the different across different states, how funding works. Essentially, areas with a higher density of low-income people, that filters into school systems, and it definitely impacts the ability to create and maintain high-quality, modern facilities, which all children deserve. So I think that's the top level. The second piece is, I've worked in charter. I've led charter schools that were like out of a, we were just working out of a church that was 100 years
Out of a
old,
box,
right?
man. Out of a box, out of a
literally.
field.
I mean, like really old buildings, but we made it work. We like looked at the space that we had. We got creative. We did design work, and we created learning spaces in places where most people would say like, you can't do that there. I'm sure within 20 miles of that school that we looked at, there's probably a charter school operating out of some strip mall that's, probably doing good things for kids, right? Maybe not white kids, but maybe, low income or African American or Latino students, right? We know that. The other piece is big doesn't have to mean bad, right? There's a big thing around like small schools, small learning environments. Yes. However, there is a good like middle ground. You can have a huge school. 5,000 is big.
That's
but
a huge school.
Yeah, it is. And if you notice in the video, they're like, here's the 9th grade section, right? They actually have smaller learning communities within a big facility, which makes a whole lot of sense. And then the last thing, going back to one of my earlier comments, was there's like this rise, not a rise, but if you're on social media, if you're paying attention to the national conversation on education and like vouchers and ESAs, and like there's some hardcore like right-wing people now involved in education at the national level, right? And I've seen them share this video. They're like, oh, do we really need more funding for schools? Maybe we don't. And they're using this video as an example of that, which is totally misleading, but highly predictable also coming from the particular people who you probably know, Charles, that are spreading this stuff. I'm like, oh man, this is, come on. There's drive 20 miles down the street and there's probably an elementary school that should probably be shut down because of asbestos.
Yeah, man. And go ahead and jump on in, Jubilee. I want you to.
Thank you. I was trying to calm down Meadow Rose, who's having a whole fit right now because someone knocked on the door.
Assume that's your dog that you.
How dare somebody knock on your door?
Called out like a child.
Don't knock on my door during the podcast.
No, man, but she's throwing a fit because she wants that natatorium.
You see,
I want that natatorium, man.
So a couple of thoughts though. I know I do not believe that in this lifetime. Here she goes. Okay. All right. I don't believe it's just not going to calm down. I don't believe that in this lifetime we're going to see all the schools look like the school that we just saw. And to my earlier point, like boo to what it represents, bravo for the children. But really what it makes me think about is what can we make more equitable? And to me, that's access. It's cross-sector collaboration. Right. To your point, Omar, where you talked about, I'm a creative, right? A recording studio or, collaboration with local politicians, right? Or media, sports, like what kind of learning experiences are students able to have access to regardless of what their school building looks like? Like that's my question. That's what I would care about. That's what I would want to, fund when I become a multimillionaire. You heard it here first. Right. I really care about that kind of stuff. And I think that those are the experiences that every child in America should have based on their interests. Right. Because I don't believe that every school is going to look like our future. It should, but I just don't think it's going to. I mean, just 5 years ago, I was in school in New York that didn't have enough outlets, or just getting whiteboards, like like smart boards.
Yep.
I mean, right. But
yeah.
When I was principal, one of the things, I would have loved for it to have been more in the school day, but we had a lot of extracurricular partnerships. We had a lot of partnerships, yoga, we had swimming, we had robotics, we had lots of different things. And we couldn't get it into the school day, but ideally, I feel like every kid in America should have access to that kind of stuff in the school day based on their interests. I think that would, I won't say eradicate the need for lovely, high high quality environments and school buildings like we're seeing here in this example. But I think that's what is going to be most important in the development of our students for now and the future.
So
Okay.
I went to a bunch of different type of schools, right? Like I went to a lot of schools. I went to Emory High School, which I'm sure David is familiar with. It's very small, less than 300 students. And it's tiny. It looks a lot better now because they've redone it and all this good stuff, right? But it looked like an office building with a gym and a cricket track. And then my parents made the great Negro migration, like a lot of people did, to Stockton, California. And I went to this school called Bear Creek that had over 2,000 students. And I drove from first period to second period. It was like a huge school, but it was like one of those outdoor schools where it wasn't Stockton is really hot and it's like farmland. So it's like a bunch of different, it's hard to describe. I think you kind of get what I'm saying. You've seen this stuff in California before, David, where it's like, you outside a lot because of the heat and all that stuff. But that was the first school I saw where it was like, oh, homecoming is different here. Oh, like they got real journalism club. They got this and they got that. And I think I get it. I know what the easy take on this is. Not easy, but I know what the take is that I've seen, right? Like, yo, this is racist, this is that. But there are black schools, and Bear Creek is not a black school for the record. There's black kids in there. It's like 400 black kids, but out of thousands of kids, it probably is not that much. But there are black schools in the past that didn't have a lot of money, that were essentially poor, but they were large schools. And we made a decision somewhere in the last 30 years that said, we don't want that system anymore. I lived in Paducah, Kentucky. It's a very, very poor place. And that what you had was you had a lot of elementary schools, and it's relatively speaking, right? You had like 2 or 3 middle schools, junior highs, and you had 1 high school. You can go, that's a model that people did not necessarily like, but there are some towns that didn't divert from that plan, and they were able to keep building in the school that was, what was that school built in, like the 1800s or something like that? Like, is that school is from like, it's not a new school. You have to check. I don't know. I don't want to mix it up with Tillman, David, if you can see. So I just think that like equity is always going to be an issue. And there are decisions that we make. There are some people that's like, look, the building is the building is the building. It's the stuff inside. Let's focus on that and let's do that. I unfortunately went to a lot of schools that felt like prisons, that looked like prisons. Actually, where some prisons might look better than some of those schools. And I think that's a reflection of some of the learning that happens. And I also think there are some kids that's probably left behind, as I know there are, right?
Yeah.
That school also has a ton of APs. They have to. That's like, I'm just saying, if you, sometimes we can't have it all the ways, right? We can't have a school with 100 kids and then want to have all these different things or whatever without being creative. What I suggested in Oakland, and I don't know if you remember this, David, I said Oakland is, to be so small, Oakland produces a lot of professional athletes, NFL, NBA, Damian Lillard, Marshawn Lynch, Leon Poe, the list can go on and on. I said, why don't the district just build a sports center where all the high school, all the kids that play sports in that city can go and utilize that facility. And that way you can get all those professional players to pour money into it, to boost it up. And it could be a destination city for athletes. You know what I mean?
Why haven't they done it? Why haven't they done it?
So question, right? You said the NFL, right? Did y'all watch the Super Bowl?
Uh-huh.
That was it was a really great game. But like, which NFL team do you think has a broke down facility?
The Raiders did. The Raiders had a terrible facility.
Yeah.
Okay. And why was that?
And in baseball, the Oakland A's had a terrible facility where they had to pay for soda out the soda machine, but they are a smart market team.
That's
No,
just
I'm
the
serious.
dysfunction. That's like the dysfunction of Oakland as a city, though. I mean, that's
Right.
But
But
go ahead.
overall,
I know you're making a point, but go ahead. But you asked a sports question that I knew the answer to.
well, that's great. I just learned something, right? But overall, I would imagine that there is a standard for the league. Right?
It's not. It's not though, right? And that's why the Yankees and the Dallas Cowboys and you know what I'm saying, and the Brooklyn Nets have incredible facilities. Like they spend a lot of money. Oakland, Billy Beane worked hard in Oakland to get all this, to try to get money, and they were like, we're not doing it. That's why a lot of teams are leaving Oakland, right? Like they're leaving. They left the Coliseum. They're leaving the arena I mean, but that's
But I think
commensurate
So-
to what
so-
you
so
got.
are you saying that you could go
that's the
to-
standard though. There might not be a written standard.
Right.
There is a standard for players and for supporters, and so it might not be a written thing, but yeah, people end up like leaving, right?
Right.
Right. So, because I think what I'm trying to get at is like, okay, I think there's a continuum, right? Because I miss Gray. I live between the black and white.
Gotcha.
If you play on the NBA, at the very least, even if you do not have the best facility, if you're on the NBA, the facility you go to is gonna have a basketball hoop. Would that be safe?
Well,
to
yeah,
say?
absolutely. You gotta have a basketball hoop.
So that's what I mean by standard, right? Like, of course, there's a continuum in terms of like how wonderful the facility will be, but at the very least, if you're on the NBA, you're gonna have a basketball and a basketball hoop. Now, one might be ripped and one might be a little shaky, but there's gonna be one. And I think, like, to me, this whole conversation just shows that education, right, always gets the short end of the stick when it comes to this. And I think people need to put respect on education's name.
But I gotta push back on you though. I gotta push, and let me tell you why I'm pushing.
It's not valued in our society. That's what I'm saying.
I hear that. I hear
Look at
you, right?
This is Jennifer. I think it's speaking to the same point here. Has that come up yet? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you actually have to put it down somewhere in writing to say like something about the rights of children, right?
Absolutely.
I don't think we do that. Yeah.
I think so. And Jeff pointed out, and I thank you for pointing this out, Jeff. Per student, Indiana 9,875 versus New York's 32,500. Decisions are being made, and I actually think that you picked a great example of professional sports. There are owners that will spend. Mark Cuban, people like to play in Dallas because Mark Cuban spends that money. People don't love playing for the Oakland A's because they don't spend money. So the Oakland A's have been a farm team for the New York Yankees and the Boston Red Sox for what, 30 years? Like all the players that have helped lead those people to the promised land, Johnny Damon, the Canseco, all these people, they started out in Oakland and then they got to a place where they deserve more money. And then they was like, you got to go. Like, we can't pay you. And then they went to New York and they got paid from these owners, right? So I think that schools are similar in certain kind of ways. That's not a town that's putting that value on it, right? That's an entity that's making some decisions about their money. And I'll just on this last one, because I love sports and my homie played for the Warriors for a long time. Before Joe Lacob bought the Warriors, they had a crummy gym in the Oakland Coliseum that was supposed to do a whole bunch of stuff that it never did. They practice on top of the Marriott Hotel where David and I have both been a ton of times. It's a decent facility. And then Joe Lacob bought the place I was on the UCSF Benioff Hospital board. Where the new arena is on some of our land. It's overseeing the water. It's one of the most expensive places. It's like a $4 or $5 billion facility, right? Like it's huge facility. And those tickets are just crazy because that's the investment that was being made. Now, we can make some different decisions. Joe Lacob pays a luxury tax every single year to keep Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, all those people. But there are owners that's like, we can't carry that roster. We're not going to spend that money. In schools, we got to make some decisions. So where you show me New York schools is getting $35,000 per pupil, and this school is getting $9,000, maybe some places just not built to be a school with 150 kids. Maybe somebody should be like, you know what? Maybe we should come together and build a mega high school and have 3,000 people and build it up over the next 10 years. I don't know. I'm just playing devil's advocate, like, because it's easy to be like, it ain't fair, but what changes are we willing to make?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's not fair, but I'm talking about values. I just think that the way that education is treated in this country, right, is it just shows you what we value as a country. And if I was coaching a leader, right, I'd say, show me your schedule, right? Like, how do you spend your day? The way that you spend your day, the way that you spend your time shows me what you value, right? You spend most of your day in your office answering emails. That's what you value. You spend most of your day in classrooms, right? Observing instruction, coaching teachers, building relationships. That's what you value. And I feel like, show me your money, show me your budget, right? I'd say the same thing to a school leader, and that'll show me what you value. And I just think that in our country, the way that education is just not valued, right? If we go to corporate America has always been 58 steps ahead of us. And I know this is private funding and all of that, blah, 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 right? But these people are coming through public school systems, are coming through private schools that are rubbing two nickels together to provide, at least a standard level, a high quality level of instruction for people that are going into these corporations and running them. So I just feel like it's a values thing. And that's why there are also so many discrepancies and so many inequities across our country.
I don't disagree, but there's so much nuance to this conversation, right? So like there's this old philosophical ideology that a guy named Nozick came up with, and it was like the Wilt Chamberlain theory. David, you ever hear this one? It's like,
nope.
It's like modern philosophy. And Nozick basically talked about this idea that like it's the Wilt Chamberlain theory. So everyone can, let's say we just like blanket economic prosperity. Everyone gets the same amount of money and all of a sudden everyone wakes up tomorrow equal. Well, then what his claim was, oh, everyone's got the same amount of money. Now Wilt Chamberlain's playing, Michael Jordan's playing, Kobe Bryant's playing, LeBron's playing. All right, LeBron will be a good example here. People are going to take their money and go spend that money to go see LeBron. So then the economic ideology is that, well, don't the Lakers and don't LeBron deserve that money because people of their own free will have gone forth and spent that money. Go ask the Detroit Pistons who's spending money on the Detroit Pistons these days, and go ask the Lakers who's spending money on the Lakers these days, right? And the ideology is one in which people are making these like self-selections in order to spend money. And Nozick is like, well, that's like just free market capitalism, right? His counterpart, a guy named Rawls, talked about the veil of ignorance and basically said, look, if you're going to wake up tomorrow and you have no idea whether you're going to be rich or poor, and you've got this small likelihood of being rich and this large likelihood of being poor, odds are you're going to choose something in the middle, right? This is the competing ideologies of education. We're saying education should be somewhere in the middle because we should be funding things equitably, but this has a lot of nuance. So for example, like what are the salaries in New York City for all these officials? How big is that central office? How much money is the Department of Education going? So they're getting $32,000 per kid. How much of that is going to, say, the Department of Ed? How much are living costs in Indiana?
Right.
So this is where I push back a lot on just making blanket statements without understanding the nuance of what's going on in Indiana, what's going on in New York, but ultimately looking at the hardline statistics of what's going on behind the scenes. And really, I think what's going on behind the scenes, in my opinion, is that good for the kids in Indiana have this school. I wish we all had this school, because you start looking at like Highlands Ranch in Texas, which is inside of Dallas, and they have a very similar school. And the reason why is they figured out very intelligently in the Nozick philosophy, this is our money. We're not going to share this with Dallas. This is our money. So they created their own separate school district to consolidate their funding. So what happens is that, they care a lot about education. They care so much about education that they legally segregated themselves from the Dallas school district in order to consolidate their funding so that it wouldn't go to the overall Dallas school system. Bee Caves and Westlake in the Austin area did something radically similar. So what happens is that it's tough state by state, because I'm all for the consolidation of resources, and it can be done incredibly. So there's a school in Denver, badass place. I thought it was a great model. Tom Boasberg did this when he was superintendent, and he basically said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to consolidate 5 of these academies. I think 2 of them are charter schools, 2 of them district schools, and 1 was like a brand new district of innovation. And it's going to be 5 different academies, 500 to 1,000 kids apiece on a shared campus where they have all these killer resources, so that these 5,000 kids are getting that natatorium, getting that basketball stadium, getting all these things, but at the same time consolidating resources. It's a brilliant idea.
Right.
And what I'm getting myself into is that you can make all the blanket statements you want on TikTok about whether this is equitable or not. And I'm like, look, cool, like fun, great. Where are you getting into the deep lines of what the law is and what practical solutions are in order to provide our kids with a better resources? Because I'll tell you what, Jubilee, sadly, the four of us are hosting a podcast about such things because our community is oftentimes working 3 jobs, extremely busy, doesn't know the nuance of the law to advocate for themselves in the same way that a Highlands Ranch would advocate for themselves to segregate their school district and consolidate their resources. And that should be the argument here. What are these people doing that's working really well for them? And then how can we take these practices and figure out how to create better equity for our community? Because unless it's someone like us talking about this or equipping our parents with this information and with the organizing strategies, then like, I don't know, man, like you're like shit out of luck. And I got to tell you, what a plug for the South Star Classroom.
But this is why I'm glad we had the conversation, right? Because there's a lot of nuance and there's a lot of emotion that gets evoked from seeing that, right? Because you tend to, especially if you didn't have that, it's like it's like a deficit. It's like, yo, I didn't get that. I wasn't able to get that. And there's something that's not fair. And there probably is a lot of things that's not fair in it, right? And there are people that's making decisions. And I remember in Oakland when they fought to break up larger schools, to have smaller schools. And in some cases it worked. I think in more cases it didn't. And now the financial situation is in ruins. And the state has done receivership, and it's probably about to go back into receivership at some point because they wanted to have smaller schools, which I understood why. It makes sense. But then you want the things that come with having a larger school, and unless some schools start to kind of work together and talk some things out and split some costs and make some 10, 15-year decisions, that's what we're going to kind of be in. We got another hot topic that comes up, but before we go there, we got to take a quick break from one of our sponsors. And when we come back on the other side, David got a story that's going to evoke just as much passion.
Do you feel overwhelmed with an invincible feeling of sadness? At Meditative Bliss, we will help you overcome the inexplicable stress you get from the boring routine chores and attain the solace and inner peace your soul has been yearning for. This innovative medium will be a source of the most peaceful and relaxing free music. So get ready to experience a euphoric treat for your spirit. Visit us on YouTube and Spotify anytime. Meditative Bliss. Serene your soul.
Welcome back. Yes. So I, took some deep breaths in between there. Meditative. Thank you. Appreciate it. David, what is on the docket for us next? Tell us what's going on here, brother.
I do want to say one thing about this. The music in the advertisement reminds me so much. When I hear it, it reminds me of like a Mac Miller beat. I don't know why. It sounds very Mac Miller-ish.
For y'all that don't know, David is a famous DJ, by the way. Can you tell me your DJ name, David?
I've got many. Yeah.
I want to hear 3 examples of a DJ name right now. Let's go.
When I was a hip hop DJ, DJ Audio Intellect, and then when I was a DJ of like all genres of music, Latin music, funk, Afrobeat, house music, hip hop, whatever, jazz. I was DJ Chango, named after one of the deities of the Orisha spirituality mindset. How about that? Okay.
Can I ask you one more question about that, DJ? One last,
for sure.
Are you a vinyl person or are you Serato? Which one?
I'm
Turntables and Serato?
I'm both. I've got a large record collection. I just got a record delivered today. It's pretty amazing.
They thought I was joking. He's a real DJ, ladies and gentlemen. As Omar would say about me, he's a real doctor.
My vinyl, my vinyl literally weighs a ton. And so do my WAV files, my audio files. Okay. So this other piece, and I feel like these are related, and we have limited time, so I'll just break down the high level for you. California, Gavin Newsom, our governor, is proposing some changes to how schools receive funding. In 1996 in California, a proposition was passed by the voters called Prop 209, which banned affirmative action in public schools, right? And so it's like, you know, none of these things were the school funding formulas, the how our school systems are set up. None of this was created by God. And so we should be able to deconstruct it and reconstruct it, right? But here we are, we're stuck in the mud of bureaucracy and tradition. And so we've constantly been looking at ways to try and circumvent that. And you know, there is a new funding formula in California called the local control funding formula, which does allow school systems, even an independent charter, like the charters I ran, we had to do the local control accountability plan, which is called the LCAP. You look at your demographics. You're not able to distinguish by race, but you're able to distinguish by like low income, unhoused, et cetera, English language learner, which in California tend to be Latino students. But you know, if African Americans as a whole, like they are in California, still the group of students that are furthest from opportunity, you know, you can't quite just say like Black students, right? You have to say like low income, but they're not all low income. So I think what the governor is proposing here is kind of a workaround so that we can identify African American Black students as a particular subgroup that would have access to what's really like $300 million, which in California will barely get you. I mean, it'll build a public restroom, maybe. I don't know. It's not a lot of money in California, where we're able to actually attempt to address, you know, low academic achievement for African American students in California. And everybody's kind of like, you know, waiting for more information. There hasn't been a lot of like support for it yet, or pushback. People are waiting. You know, obviously we talked about this earlier before we started the show. It's a great thing if you're running for president. You know, it's a good thing to have on your resume. So like, is this a political act? All of that stuff aside, two things. Number one, schools receive funding. Schools hire based on funding. You create programs. You provide resources. And just because money might be designated for a particular group, like if you have a speech therapist going into a classroom to support 3 kids, they can actually support larger groups of kids, right? If you have, you know, tutors, or if you have after school programming that's like tagged with specific funding, there are ways to ensure that like that funding can cover like more kids other than what's designated. And so California still finds itself in a similar situation, pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, where African-American students are the lowest achieving in our schools. And that's a significant issue. And nobody seems to really be doing anything about it. This is an attempt to possibly do something about it, but it feels more like, to me, like an unfunded mandate. So I don't know. I mean, I think I'll leave it there. You know, California is a big state. 300 million is not going to get very far. Overall, our funding in California has more than doubled over the last 10 to 15 years. So we used to be at the bottom, and now we're like in the mid of the 50 states. So there's money out there. It's just a matter of like, when are schools going to figure out, you know, how to organize themselves to better support African American students, Latino students. It just feels like, to me, more money, putting more money into a system that has not demonstrated that more money and more resource will actually benefit young people. It can create jobs, it can sustain a system, but I still have yet to see evidence that it's actually going to benefit children. I'm going to leave it there.
Hey, have at it, people. Hopefully people can stay on for about 10 minutes longer just so we can have this conversation. But jump on in. I mean, what are your thoughts? Basically, what I'm hearing you say for the people out there is that Gavin Newsom is proposing about $300 million as he is earmarking or saying is for Black students for servicing them, which is a nice soundbite, because again, we know that the internet and people that are not in education, it's you can have an emotional response that is a very positive thing. But what David is saying is that $300 million is actually not a sufficient amount of money for what is the largest state in the union for a population that is well behind. But it looks good if you're running for president. But how do we feel about that? That's from David.
Yep.
I mean, Lord help. I there's some missing pieces there for me. So I'm listening and I hear the money part, but I don't hear about strategy. And I know it's politicians, so maybe they, that wouldn't fall in their wheelhouse. But I just feel like during the pandemic, I mean, it would be like taking millions of COVID vaccines and
what's up with y'all and these dogs, man?
Hi, look at my friend.
Oh my God! Please
Man,
continue.
look, please continue, man. But you know what's up with them dogs, man? Everything.
That's my friend.
I don't want no kids or pets. Continue.
Have a heart. Come
I
on,
do.
Doc. No, I just feel like it's like taking millions of COVID vaccines and just like dropping it on the sidewalk. Like this should do the trick, guys. Like
keep loading up. Keep loading up.
Yeah, because I just feel like, and I know it's just a soundbite. It's in the beginning phases and all of that. But I feel like sometimes in education, we just have a rollout problem, and I'm always going to use the greatest example, which I think is how Common Core was rolled out, or the lack thereof, an effective rollout that we're still trying to recover and recuperate from till this day. So I just think, jury's still out for me. What's the strategy? Where's the task force, and who's going to help when this great for the money, but it is a resource. It's a tool that needs to be informed by expertise, right? By wisdom, by knowledge and understanding. And I believe that school leaders don't need to have that weight on them to have to figure out what to do with these sort of funds when they come around. Yes, there needs to be a level of autonomy. Yes, they need to have their voice in the decision-making process. But we also need some people who are able to come alongside and be like, okay, based on what I'm seeing, based on what your data is saying, based on the historical data, like this is the direction that I think would be able to benefit these Black and brown children that are in your school, in your district. So that's
like,
what
are the actual like mechanisms? What are the moves? What are the instructional moves? What are the programmatic moves that
man?
that people
what
have
are you
access
talking
to?
about,
Jump
man?
in there,
No
brother.
one cares about that, man.
What are you
wanna
gonna
see
do?
the money
I care.
moves. I want to see the money moves. Look, I don't know why I got full screen of this, but I'm just gonna say my piece, man. Look,
You just
I
sounded
think
like Cardi
Jubilee
B.
and David gave the most like well-constructed, rational dissemination of thought in terms of like, this is the problem. This has been a previous problem in education. This is, I think we can rectify it. I'm like, what, man? I want that money. I want Gavin Newsom to get on that like float from like Batman 1989, like the Joker. And he's just out there and he's like, here's the money. And I want to be out there. And I'm like, yeah, I've collected all this money. And then he like, gasses us all. Because like that's a money move I want to see happening. But look, I'm making a joke, but I'm not making a joke. I think the way you two constructed this argument was so well done from a practical standpoint, but these folks ain't acting practical. You've got Governor Greg Abbott running for the president out of Texas and making insane executive things to basically cover his behind for school safety in Texas because of the Uvalde situation. And now we're getting charter schools, public schools, all of us are getting this massive radical influx of straight up demands, oftentimes not well funded, in order to increase the safety of schools. Like, we got to have barbed wire around these schools. We got to have these deadlocks in front of these schools. We got to have this, we got to that. And I was like, you know what we should be using that money for? How about ensuring that these kids aren't so angry and sad? Because once again, the moves of these governors and of these legislatures that have no comprehension about education or what to do with this funding are not finding the root issues and then targeting them. And you've got DeSanctimonious over in Florida doing the same shit. And now you got Governor Newsom acting like the Joker in Batman 1989, being like, hey, yo, black people, I got your money. Come on, man. And just throwing it out like the Joker, like he's at the club. And I'm like, yo, I get it. I see what you're trying to do.
It's so funny though. But this is why I gave you the full screen so I can like pull up stats without the audience knowing what I'm doing. But it's okay. But
please,
I mean,
no, man, no one saw that. You covered up pretty well.
It's all
I didn't
good.
See you looking up any stats?
It's okay. I found it. But here's why I think it's interesting. And here's the agentic moment for people that's watching. Okay, there's going to be a lot of emotion that just runs high in around schools and education. Here's the thing. Every industry feel like they get the short end of the stick. And I just want to tell you all, a lot of Americans don't really care about your kids' education. It's really, they like, that's not my job. My kids is grown, or I ain't got kids, or whatever the case is, right? Like I also worked in hospitals. I can say that hospitals have the most inequitable funding, right? So, but let's put this money in perspective, right? $300 million, right? California in 2022 was the fourth, is pushing in to become the world's fourth largest economy. The world's fourth. That with the GDP for California in 2022 is $3.4 trillion. All right, we have more money in California than many, if not most, other countries. And so the thing that I would tell you all is to like look at that stuff. And we started this show talking about economies of scale. You got to still look at economies of scale, and you also got to look at there's a number of black kids in California, but it ain't that many compared to like if you go to places in the South where black people are more concentrated. And $300,000 to put in perspective for you, OUSD's, that's Oakland Unified School budget, is somewhere north of maybe 750 million. Correct me, David. It's around that. It creeps up a little bit. I was like I said, I was a board member for Benioff Children's Hospital. We oversaw a family of hospitals. It wasn't as nearly as, it was maybe 5-6 hospitals, maybe a $4 billion budget. Children's Hospital Oakland by itself's budget was about $550 million. Okay, that doesn't, and the census is not a very large census. So when we talk about money and dollars, this game is deeper. But we know that 300 million sounds like a lot, especially when I'm running for president. And listen, he probably had the best of intentions, but here's the beauty that you get to have when you're a politician running for a larger platform. Unfunded mandates, baby.
Right.
Like making these statements. And I'm not just trying to go at Gavin Newsom, because DeSantis is doing his thing on the Republican side. Abbott is doing his thing on the Republican side. And these people are trying to play the bases. And I don't think either of these bases are getting actually served, but they're getting... Right. They know, because of that TikTok video shows us, when you put something out there, I'm going to be emotional about it first before we start to ask some deeper nuanced questions about what's actually happening. There's a lot of sacrifices that can be made, but you know, I'm glad David brought that up, because David stays on Governor Newsom's ass.
Oh yeah, and Tony Thurman's too.
And Tony, and again, and for the record, there's a conflict of interest for me. Tony Thurman is my brother.
You don't have to do that.
I just want people to know. I mean, it's fine. Me and Tony don't get along on everything, but Tony Thurman, he threw me my first birthday party. He threw me my first surprise birthday party. He's one of my best friends. We do not agree on everything on the academic education side of things, but I love you, Tony. We can fight about education policy all day, but David is on these people's asses, and I'm glad that he got to get that off.
I love this comment. This Ms. Toya's comment, are people falling for the okie doke? They are. They're going to, and I love that. And the reason it's the okie doke because if you look at this this possible shift, and same with our current system in California, the local control accountability plan and local control funding formula, there are no consequences. There's no accountability. Like if you're targeting of a specific group of students, and you want to move the needle on attendance or on an academic measure or on a mental health measure, if you don't hit your metrics, there's no accountability. So in the end, you really don't have skin in the game. You just come back to the table and, let's just change our strategy. Let's keep changing our strategy until we can hit a particular outcome, right? In the meantime, children are in schools, children that we know, groups of children, demographics of children that are not being served. And $300 million in California, like I said, will barely get like a McDonald's built. It's ridiculous. It's actually quite offensive now that I'm reflecting on it based on this conversation. Maybe the okey doke got my brain going. Yeah, man, it's crazy.
Well, why don't you bring us in the final thoughts, man? I think this has been a good conversation. We'll go counterclockwise, starting with you, David, and then Jubilee, you're on deck.
Oh man, closing thoughts. Yeah, I mean, I think those were kind of my closing thoughts. Going back to the facilities piece, again, like facilities don't teach children. They can, they can be used as a mechanism, as a tool to facilitate learning and learning spaces. But yeah, you got to understand, even we talked about like this particular school district. We talked about the difference between, access to funds that between charters and district schools. There's often, vast inequities. But the proof is in the pudding. If you really want to look at what's happening, look at one entity. School education is very decentralized. But if you look at the unit of change that is a school district, look at Oakland, look at Los Angeles, look at San Diego. I mean, even within that unit, which is called the district, the schools look very different in particular areas than they do in other areas, right? So you have like so it's really not a thing of funding. It's rooted in classism and racism and power. Who gets what and how do they get it, right? And so those are the things that we have to break down, because this doesn't exist across the country. It exists within school districts. In Oakland, you go look at Skyline High School, and then you go look at Castlemont. In San Diego, you go look at La Jolla High versus San Diego High. You're going to see a difference. And this is like one system, right? And then this other piece in California, I mean, I think we just got to get real about instruction. We got to get real about teacher training. We have to get real about, actually applying some accountability to schools so that we can, send a message to schools that this stuff really matters, and making sure that we have, educators in our classrooms that look like the children that are in those classrooms. I think that's an important piece of it. And $300 million is, it might kick off the first 6 months of a campaign, but it ain't going to do much more than that. So maybe they should just save their money. Done.
That's what's up. Jubilee.
Yeah, I believe the children are our future.
Oh,
Teach them
Teach them
well.
well. Let them be the
let
way.
them lead the way.
Show them all the beauty they possess inside. Give them a sense of pride.
Say it like you all said earlier. There's so many nuances. Yes, this we know. I just think facilities would matter less. Yes, we need all the upgrades and all the state of the art stuff, but I feel like that would matter less if we could at least agree on what learning experiences all children should have across the nation. I feel like I'm always coming back to this, like, can we agree on what these learning experiences could be, and then let that inform what is needed in the building versus letting the dollar per student determine what each building is able to have. What about the children? Final thought.
All right. Oh,
Sexual chocolate. Sexual chocolate. You don't know that movie, ladies and gentlemen. Like, y'all know.
You better know it. That's my favorite
Yeah,
movie.
That's right. That's right, man.
oh,
That's
one
right.
of mine too.
Yes.
It better be, man. Talking about that song from the What's Going Down episode of That's My Mama. So, two things. Many of y'all may not be familiar with a guy named Dr. Ron Heifetz. He's a professor at Harvard. He teaches leadership through the lens of psychology. And his biggest comments whenever leaving that classroom, whenever leaving any of his workshops, is when you go back into your communities, go back in quietly. Learn to ask better questions and effectively find the root of power. That's a very, very nuanced way of encapsulating what many of you all may have seen on Ted Lasso, which is a fantastic show. And if you've not seen it on Apple,
It's coming back.
Yeah, third season, baby. And
Final season.
Oh, damn, final season. I need that show to continue. He's playing darts with the owner, very rich, privileged owner of the soccer team. And he starts going into this really cool monologue about how this owner is making all these assumptions about Ted Lasso. And had he learned to ask better questions and learned to find the root of power, he may have discovered some things about Ted Lasso that would have been helpful in this tournament of darts that they were playing in. And Ted Lasso finished with, it's better to be curious, not judgmental. What Ted Lasso and what Dr. Ron Heifetz are saying is, this is the advice I have in my final thoughts. Many of us can just sit there and be judgmental about what we saw on TikTok instead of being curious or asking the right questions. When we talk about going back into a community quietly, it's basically saying the louder you are, the greater target you are, and thus the power structures are going to figure out that you are there. And you don't want them to see you coming. And this is, again, why South Star Classroom is such an integral part of not just helping you on the classroom, but strategizing long-term about what we're doing, because the crux of this story is that we should be asking more questions and being much more curious about funding sources, communities, where dollars are being spent, who those people are, what those power structures are, in order to figure out how to play this game, in order to get better outcomes for our kids, in order to divert resources that will help kids more and not adults more. So you can be outraged all you want, but until you actually spend a moment to stop the outrage and the emotional outpouring and start thinking and questioning, we're not going to come up with solutions that are actually going to benefit our kids.
I think that was really powerful. I would say in a very similar way, people are smart. People in power are smart, and they know to target your heart and your emotions more than your intellect. And I would say we are not in a position, especially as Black people, brown people, poor people, whomever. We just not in the advantageous position to where we can allow that to happen. And I would just say, you can choose. The four of us, let's say something was happening, and the four of us could say, you know what? Let's all combine our households. And if we do that, we can combine our funding and we could live a certain type of way. And that might work for us. But there might be somebody, let's say me, who's used to being single and a bachelor, who wants to live alone. But that might work for me. The point is that these conversations are nuanced, and one size doesn't necessarily fit all. And I think that when we see stuff like this, people have been hurting for so long that sometimes people just want to feel good. They just want to feel good. And it reminds me of when I used to go to NA meetings with my mom, and people would talk about why they would use drugs, because they just wanted some relief and wanted to feel good. It is not our fault. It might not be our fault about the racism in this country, about the impropriety from leadership in this country, about the way kids are treated in schools or old people are treated in hospitals and everything in between. But at some point, we got to just grab it by the reins and say, look, I got to come from I'm going to let my emotions and what I feel in this hurt that's very real. I'm going to let it drive me to be more thoughtful in my execution and what that is, so we can actually focus on the things that matter, because they'll keep throwing up a TikTok that'll piss you off about what these people are getting. And Gavin Newsom, even though he is he's seen a $3.4 trillion GDP of growth and is getting higher in California, can throw out a number which is relatively small for the type of money he sits on of $300 million for Black kids. That ain't gonna get down to them Black kids, and we know that it's not. Our emotions will continue to wag the dog, and just because I done seen two damn dogs on this show today, I think that's a fitting end. That's David, that's Jube, that's Omar, I'm Charles, and we will see you all same bat time, same bat station next week. Peace out.